When the Germans first saw it, they didn't know what hit them. One moment, the countryside was silent. The next, a blur of motion streaked through the hedgerows, and a Tiger tank exploded before anyone could react. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't artillery. It was something new. The American M18 Hellcat had arrived, and it would rewrite every rule of tank warfare before the war was done. The story of the Hellcat began not on the battlefield, but in the minds of engineers who dared to challenge convention. They believed that in an age where armor ruled, speed could be its own weapon. While other nations poured steel into thick plating, America's designers stripped it away. They envisioned a machine so fast it could dodge death instead of enduring it. What they created looked fragile, almost reckless: thin armor, an open top, and an engine that roared like an aircraft. But that roar would soon echo across Europe. By 1944, the Hellcat was ready for war. Sleek, low, and deadly, it carried a 76-millimeter gun that could punch through most German armor from the side. Its radial engine pushed it past 55 miles per hour, faster than any tank the world had ever seen. To the crews who climbed inside for the first time, it felt like stepping into a race car with a cannon strapped to its heart. When they arrived in France after D-Day, soldiers of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion were told one thing: don't get hit. They laughed, but they understood. Their job wasn't to fight head-on, it was to ambush, strike, and disappear before the enemy could aim. In the bocage of Normandy, that doctrine became legend. The first time a Hellcat platoon met a German column, they hit from concealment, fired 3 rounds, and were gone before the counterfire began. The Germans thought they were facing dozens of vehicles. There had been only 5. Every battle turned into a dance of danger. The driver and commander moved as one. The commander scanning through binoculars, the driver feeling the terrain like an instinct. Speed is life, they said, and they meant it literally. The gunner learned to fire in motion. The loader learned to reload while the vehicle bounced through mud and shell craters. Inside that thin shell of armor, courage was the only real protection. In September 1944, near Nancy, France, the Hellcats earned their name. German Panthers advanced through the fog, confident in their armor. Lieutenant Henry G. McCall's platoon lay hidden behind a ridge. He waited until the lead tank crested the rise. "Fire!" the first Panther erupted. The second hesitated, searching for the source. The Hellcats shifted position in seconds. Engines screaming, reappeared on the flank and struck again. Within 5 minutes, the German spearhead was gone. Local infantry called the Hellcats the Ghosts. You heard their guns, but never saw where they came from. As autumn turned to winter, the legend spread. Every German commander who heard reports of fast American destroyers felt a flicker of dread. They were told to expect a blur, something that hit and vanished. When the Battle of the Bulge erupted that December, the ghosts returned to the forest. The Ardennes was a nightmare of ice and smoke, where even heavy tanks struggled to move. The Hellcats, light and agile, became the saviors of frozen roads. They darted through snow-covered villages, ambushed columns, and pulled back before the enemy could react. At Bastogne, one unit held a crossroads against a force 3 times its size. They fired until their barrels glowed red, moved through side roads, and struck again from another angle. German crews swore they were fighting an entire battalion, but in truth only 4 Hellcats were there. Their mobility turned defense into illusion. For every shot the Germans fired, the Americans answered from somewhere new. The forest became their ally, the snow their cloak. The conditions were brutal. Engines froze overnight. Men shivered inside open turrets as snow drifted across their shoulders. Yet they kept fighting, pushing their machines to the limit. Each crew learned the sound of its own engine, the rhythm that told them when to shift, when to hide, when to run. When a Tiger's shell missed by inches, the air itself seemed to tear apart. But still they laughed, not out of madness, but out of adrenaline. They were alive, and their enemies were not. As the Bulge began to collapse, the Hellcats took the fight to the retreating Germans. In January 1945, they swept through Belgium and Luxembourg, cutting off armored columns that tried to flee east. On one frozen morning, a Hellcat platoon intercepted a convoy of half-tracks and tanks. They attacked from 3 directions at once, their engines echoing through the hills. The battle lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, the road was littered with burning steel. Not one Hellcat had been lost. By now, their reputation preceded them. German radio intercepts called them Panzerjägergeister, tank-hunting ghosts. Soldiers claimed they could hear the distinct whine of the Hellcat's radial engine moments before disaster. The sound became a psychological weapon. It meant death was coming fast. As spring approached, the Allied armies surged toward the Rhine. The Hellcats led the charge. Their thin armor allowed them to cross bridges that heavier tanks couldn't. They raced ahead of infantry, securing crossroads, intercepting fleeing convoys. To the civilians watching from shattered windows, the sight of the Hellcat was both terrifying and liberating, a symbol that the tide had turned. At Remagen, the last intact bridge over the Rhine became a battlefield. German forces were desperate to destroy it before the Americans could cross. Hellcat crews were ordered to protect the engineers and infantry holding the bridgehead. They arrived under fire, artillery exploding around them, machine guns raking the approach roads. But the Hellcats moved like lightning, weaving between craters, returning fire with deadly precision. One by one, enemy positions fell silent. Lieutenant Jack Ramsey's platoon faced 2 Tigers blocking the eastern approach. The first shell from a Tiger missed by a yard, showering Ramsey's crew in mud. They charged full speed, closing the distance faster than the Germans could adjust. The Hellcat fired on the move. The shot hit the Tiger's side armor, setting it ablaze. Before the second could react, Ramsey's driver slammed the throttle, skidding behind a building. They emerged on the flank, fired again, and the second Tiger exploded. The way to the bridge was clear. For that action, the platoon received a unit citation, but Ramsey would later say the real credit belonged to the machine. "No tank in the world could have done that," he said. "Only the Hellcat could move like that, could fight like that." As March turned to April, the Hellcats swept deeper into Germany. They passed through towns where surrender flags hung from windows, where children watched wide-eyed as the fast-moving American destroyers roared past. But the fighting wasn't over yet. The Germans still had teeth, and they showed them in ambushes and desperate last stands. In one such fight near Kassel, a Hellcat troop stumbled into an entire company of Jagdpanthers. The first American vehicle was hit instantly, engulfed in fire. The rest reacted with instinct. They scattered, fanning out across the open field, engines screaming. The gunners fired on the move, aiming for the thinner side armor of the German tank destroyers. Smoke, dirt, and flame filled the air. It was chaos, pure, unfiltered chaos. When the battle ended, the field was a wasteland of wrecks. The Americans had lost 2 Hellcats, but 5 Jagdpanthers lay burning. A miracle, everyone said. But to the men who fought there, it wasn't luck. It was the doctrine of movement, the creed of speed. Every mile closer to Berlin brought new stories. Hellcats racing down highways, outpacing their own support columns. Crews sleeping beside their machines, exhausted but unwilling to stop. The sound of their engines became the soundtrack of victory, relentless, unstoppable. And yet, even amid triumph, there was loss. Many who fought in those final weeks never saw the peace they were fighting for. Thin armor couldn't save you from a direct hit, and not every maneuver ended in escape. Each destroyed Hellcat left behind a silence that lingered longer than the roar of battle. Still, the legend grew. In the ruins of the Reich, German officers spoke with a mix of awe and disbelief. "They moved like devils," one said. "We fired, but they were gone before the smoke cleared." The war was bleeding out, but nobody told the men inside those thin-skinned machines. Each dawn still brought new orders, new objectives, and new risks. The Hellcat crews didn't slow down. They sped up. Every mile deeper into Germany was another chance for the enemy to surprise them. Every shadow might hide an ambush. Every farmhouse might conceal a gun. The only defense they trusted was movement. As one crewman said later, "If you're not moving, you're dying." By April 1945, the roads of central Germany were a surreal sight. Refugees, surrendering troops, burned tanks, and, cutting through it all, the M18 Hellcats roaring like metallic predators through the chaos. Their white stars were streaked with mud, their engines coughing smoke after weeks without rest. But still, they moved. The sound of the radial engine had become the sound of inevitability. When they reached the outskirts of Heilbronn, resistance hardened. German units refused to surrender, fortified in houses, cellars, and factory yards. The city became a maze of gunfire. The Hellcats entered first, weaving through rubble and flames. Every corner could hide a Panzerfaust, every window a sniper. The gunners kept their barrels sweeping, the commanders scanning like hawks. They fired on muzzle flashes, on movement, on instinct. When shells struck nearby walls, concrete dust filled the air like snow. One crew, led by Sergeant Alan Parker, pushed into an industrial district under cover of darkness. Their orders were to locate and destroy a pair of self-propelled guns that had been hammering American infantry. They advanced slowly, lights off, only the faint moon reflecting off the steel hull. The silence was shattered by a deafening blast, an ambush. The first shell missed by inches, tearing through the street behind them. The driver floored the throttle. The Hellcat surged forward, swung around the corner, and came face to face with a German assault gun. Parker didn't hesitate. "Fire!" The round struck the enemy vehicle squarely in the side. The explosion lit up the night, and for a moment the entire block was a storm of flame. That fight lasted only minutes, but it told the story of the Hellcat in a single breath: speed, shock, survival. The next morning, Parker's platoon had cleared 3 city blocks. When infantry finally caught up, they found the Hellcats parked in silence, crews slumped in exhaustion, eyes red from smoke and lack of sleep. The deeper they pushed, the stranger the war became. German units were surrendering in droves, but others fought on as if possessed. In the town of Auerbach, a Hellcat commander named Lieutenant O'Neill found himself facing an entire train of armored cars trying to escape east. He had 6 vehicles. He ordered a flanking move along the rail embankment, and the Hellcats opened fire as they raced parallel to the moving train. Each shot found its mark. The cars exploded one after another in a chain of fire that lit the valley for miles. The crew joked later that it felt like chasing a dragon and killing it one scale at a time. But there were moments that silenced even laughter. Outside Leipzig, one Hellcat was hit by an 88mm shell that went straight through the turret. The explosion ripped the gunner apart and threw the commander from the open hatch. The rest of the crew dragged his body behind a wall and returned fire until the enemy gun fell silent. When the medics arrived, there was nothing left to save. They buried him beside the wreckage, the steel hull still warm from battle. The commander took off his helmet and whispered, "You brought us this far, brother." Those were the moments that gave the machine its soul. It wasn't the speed or the gun. It was the men who believed in it, who trusted it when logic said they shouldn't. They called it "our angel with a bad temper." By late April, the war was collapsing faster than anyone expected. Allied columns raced through Germany from every direction, and the Hellcats were always near the front. Their final missions were strange and chaotic. One day they'd destroy an armored convoy. The next they'd escort prisoners or chase rumors of SS holdouts in the woods. The line between victory and exhaustion blurred completely. On April 30th, news crackled over the radio. Hitler was dead. Some crews cheered, others just stared at their maps, too numb to celebrate. They knew it wasn't over until the last shot was fired. A few days later, near the Czech border, that last shot finally came. A German armored car tried to break through an American roadblock. A single Hellcat turned its turret, fired once, and silence returned. The war in Europe was finished. When the ceasefire was announced, the Hellcat crews didn't roar their engines or fire into the air. They simply sat in place, listening to the quiet. For months, they had lived at full throttle, their hearts synchronized with the roar of their machines. Now there was only stillness. Some men wept, others just closed their eyes and let the wind pass through the open turret one last time. In the weeks that followed, the M18s lined up in makeshift motor pools. Mechanics cleaned them, painted over bullet holes, replaced tracks worn to nothing. But everyone knew their time was ending. The war had been won, and the Hellcat's era was fading. Speed had saved countless lives, but peace didn't need speed, it needed patience. Yet the legend refused to die. Soldiers told stories that blurred the line between truth and myth. They spoke of Hellcats that outran artillery, of drivers who dodged shells by instinct, of engines that refused to die even when riddled with shrapnel. German officers, in their post-war interviews, admitted something remarkable. They feared the Hellcat not for its armor or its firepower, but for its unpredictability. You never knew where it would appear. It broke the rhythm of battle. It changed the rules. In the years that followed, many of those same vehicles were shipped overseas again, to Korea, to training bases, to foreign armies rebuilding from the ashes. Some were scrapped, their metal melted into peacetime industry, but a few survived, restored and displayed in museums where their engines still start on special days. When they do, veterans gather and close their eyes. The sound takes them back to the fields of France, the forests of the Ardennes, the bridges over the Rhine, to the moments when speed was life and courage was the only armor. The M18 Hellcat never pretended to be invincible. It was fragile, exposed, and dangerous even to its own crew. But that was its secret. The men inside knew exactly what they were risking, and they did it anyway. They turned that fragility into fury, that lightness into lightning. In a world ruled by heavy armor, they proved that agility could be deadlier than steel. There's a story from the final week of the war that captures everything the Hellcat stood for. A platoon was ordered to intercept a retreating German convoy near the Danube. The weather was terrible, the roads flooded, visibility almost zero. The commander considered turning back, but his driver grinned and said, "Sir, we can beat the rain." They drove through the storm, engines howling, water spraying over the open turret. When they reached the riverbank, the Germans were already halfway across on barges. The Hellcats opened fire. Shells hit the water like thunder. One by one, the barges went up in flames. When the shooting stopped, the rain did too. The sun broke through and the smoke rose like mist. The commander looked across the river and whispered, "That's the last one." Moments like that became the Hellcat's legacy. Not just the victories, but the spirit, the refusal to slow down, the faith in motion. Even decades later, tank commanders studying military history would look at the M18 and see more than a relic. They'd see a lesson. Sometimes the best armor is daring itself. Today, when you stand beside a restored Hellcat, it seems almost delicate. Thin steel, open turret, exposed crew space. But listen closely when the engine starts. You can hear the heartbeat of every man who once trusted it. You can almost see the blur of movement, the flash of muzzle fire, the moment before it vanished at 55 miles per hour. For the Germans, it was a nightmare that came without warning. For the Americans, it was the fastest angel of the war. And for history, it remains the machine that turned speed into survival and survival into legend. Because when death was everywhere and every second counted, the M18 Hellcat gave its crews 3 precious minutes, the time between being seen and disappearing again into the smoke. 3 minutes to live, to fight, to change the course of a battle. And sometimes, that was all it took. Even now, long after the war, the name still carries a shiver. Not because it was the most armored or the most powerful, but because it was the one that refused to play by the rules. It was the ghost that haunted the German tanks until the very end. The M18 Hellcat wasn't just a machine. It was a message. A reminder that speed, courage, and audacity could overcome anything. And in the fading echoes of the battlefield, it still whispers its creed to anyone who dares to listen. Don't stand and fight. Move, strike, vanish, because ghosts don't die. They disappear.